Thanks so much. It's really lovely to be here. And I don't always script my talks. So today I've written a talk which I have timed for exactly 45 minutes. And I'll set my timer just to make sure that I don't speak too slowly. So thanks very much to Rachel for the generous invitation to present. In my work today, I'm going to draw on my Australian government-funded Future Fellowship, which runs from 2017 to 2021, so I'm in the fairly early stages of it, to theorise the effects and the affects of a visual art research program that I've developed to employ art practice as a means for young people to learn about different faiths. Through arts practices, young people create images of what I'm calling intrafaith futures. And I'm going to focus on the materiality of creative learning as an agent for change and as a means of creating shared understandings. So today I'm drawing mainly on data from Sydney and recent Manchester fieldwork. It's a multi-sited study that is based in Sydney and Melbourne and Manchester and London. And I'm going to show that collaborative art making can express attachments and forms of relationality that aren't able to be articulated in words by the children and young people with whom I work. I'm arguing that the materiality of making is core to their process of expression and to the creation of these intrafaith futures. So the agency of materiality has formed a particular focus of new materialist feminist thought across the past decade and has in other ways been acknowledged within art theory for many more years. For example, early work, which has now been substantively critiqued by writers such as Stuart Martin on relational aesthetics, developed by theorists such as Nicholas Bourriard, described art that was modelled on human relations and their social contexts. So Bourriard, as many of you will know, saw artists as facilitators or activators rather than as makers, and he regarded art as information exchange between the artist and the viewer. So it was an informatic rendering of aesthetics. This approach has been problematised largely because the artist is positioned by Bourriard as someone who gives audiences access to power. Responding to critiques of Bourriard's position, the term socially engaged practice can, but certainly doesn't always, describe art that is collaborative, participatory, and involves people as the medium or the material of the work. So my project extends such definitions of socially engaged practice to involve faith or belief as a core material of artwork. Making diffractive or many different and entangled understandings of faith is the purpose of my arts workshops. Through undertaking socially engaged arts practices that work with faith and belief as the material of art that is crafted and reshaped as a collective intrafaith subjectivity, the Interfaith Childhoods Project creates new epistemic communities. Building on histories of feminist labour and activism contained in feminist theory and art practice, the project looks to remake aspects of the social to constitute interactive, intrafaith collective matterings of faith relations and experiences of multicultural urban space. So my previous research, as many of you know, can be seen to embody an ethos of practice that's popularised in some respects by the phrase the social turn, a phrase that was first used by the historian Claire Bishop to describe socially engaged work that's collaborative, participatory, and involves people and ideas and beliefs as the medium or the material of an artwork. In her 2006 essay, Collaboration and Its Discontents, Bishop argues that art that operates under the umbrella of the social turn tends to happen outside museums or galleries, although this isn't always the case. Because much of the art produced through socially engaged practices is collaborative, it can focus on choreographing constructive social change or choreographing particular social relationships. It's rarely commercial and rarely object-based. Socially engaged art can be a political resource and a means through which young people are also able to communicate quite complex social ideals. It can make cultural, lived, ephemeral issues visible as it communicates through images, through icons, through feelings, colours, textures and sounds. art can move us to feel positively or negatively about subjects. So the project here that I'm discussing today is designed to complicate and extend the very acute nature of what's called broadly counter-terrorism work in Australia and the UK. And this work largely acquiesces to dominant cultural imaginaries that assume the legitimacy of an idea of counter-radicalisation and associated processes of radicalisation, a trajectory of which I'm very critical. As a British colony, Australian work has been influenced by aspects of the UK's prevent policy, and as such, there's an existing relationship between all four sites in Sydney, London, Melbourne and Manchester. All cities continue to experience rapid population growth and increases in the nature of security threats. London and Manchester experienced unrelated violent public attempts during my fieldwork in these cities, and both attacks were linked to discourses on terrorism by the news media, even though neither attack appears to be genuinely linked to religious belief, although media discourses have made this connection very publicly. And it can be seen as part of a broader apparatus that problematically machines religious discourses in public lives in ways that marginalise non-Christian faiths. As Ashlyn O'Donnell has shown, radicalisation is employed in inherently problematic ways in contemporary political and popular discourses. Despite a lack of clarity concerning what exactly radicalisation is, and numerous methodological problems associated with ideas of how people might become radical, rhetorics of counter-radicalisation, fears of cultural contagion and xenophobia are discourses in relation to which Muslim communities are often represented, and at times through which the politicisation of refugees and asylum seekers is justified. Further, such discourses can become the means through which non-Muslim young people learn about the Muslim faith. So through developing arts-based community engagement programs that are designed to make new kinds of interethnic habitus, I'm looking to craft new repertoires of feeling about multicultural and multi-faith youth, or what I'm calling interfaith futures, that challenge xenophobic and Muslim-phobic imaginings put forward by popular discourses. So this is the first major child and community interfaith research program across Australia and the UK. And the project aims to develop a series of arts programs for interfaith children, to document and understand if and how non-verbal, aesthetic and culturally coded forms of information change how children of different faiths relate to each other, and bring interfaith parents or carers into discussion around their children's faith experiences and their own faith experiences. The focus groups hold community members' experiences of being a minority faith up against their public representations of their faith and talk about juxtapositions between the two experiences. So I argue that art remains an underutilised resource in the field of interfaith research, concerned as it is with making affective interventions in cultural logics. It's a tool that we can do more with. And I'm bringing my work on affect and socially engaged practice together with this new interest in interfaith relationship building to try and affect positive social change. So recent work on interfaith suggests that although the research on interfaith organisations itself is still in very formative stages, the implications of this process of interfaith research on deepening our understandings has already been shown to be important. Drawing on such an understanding of the inherent value of interfaith work, the arts workshops with children are curated through the belief that interfaith research is very uniquely positioned to advance our current understandings of the processes and mechanisms that lead to reduced prejudice. And within my fieldwork, I consider two children from different faiths making a shared artwork as an interfaith practice. So I'm firmly of the belief that arts engagement programs can make images depicting positive interethnic habitus and interfaith habitus of children from different faith backgrounds. But this is a relatively new area of work in the UK. There's some Dutch work that is taking materialist methods and practices and really leading the way, but new materialist philosophy broadly is not engaged with in any interfaith work. Set against the Brexit vote, A politically polarised Europe. I mean, recent votes have been less polarising than they might have been, but overall the political landscape in Europe has been increasingly polarising. And we have ongoing Australian anxiety around achieving and maintaining successful, cohesive national identity and accompanying fears of boat people and multicultural failure. The face of the so-called terrorist has become almost synonymous with the face of the Muslim. Recent attacks in Manchester and London and press coverage of these attacks are a case in point. Such faciality stands in for the very intimacy and physicality that abstract discussions of evil and fear overlook. As Greg Noble cogently identifies, the imagined threat of the terrorist has come to symbolise individual and national vulnerability to attack. New public faces of interfaith youth are needed to change the texture of existing imaginaries and associated modes of interfaith belonging. And this new belonging must underpin new intersubjective relations. So starting young is thought to be critically important in terms of achieving social cohesion and achieving enduring social change. Interfaith arts workshops that examine ideas of community, belonging, meaning, love and faith can teach children that friends might have very different religious backgrounds but shared values. And we're looking to see if this can prevent feeling detached from those who don't share similar faith systems. So I want to speak on methods for a moment. So I think I'll leave that slide there and just talk a little bit about arts practice as research. So I'm arguing that arts practice can materialise the social in new ways. As a methodological mobilisation of affect theory, focusing on activating and transforming emotional responses, art practice can become a technology of social choreography. So my project considers the creation of new forms of interethnic, interracial community and national belonging through art. The methodological framework focuses on non-verbal, aesthetic and culturally coded forms of information exchange. Art-making workshops maximise the potential for non-verbal communication and allow for the observation of how interfaith young people relate to each other through body language, iconography, colours and gestures. The arts workshops generate innovative data sets that include images generated by children, videos and photographs of the children working together. And these sources offer invaluable insight into the embodied politics of art making and the interpersonal relationships that such art making practices entail. The families, just checking my spot, sorry. So yeah, I have focus groups with the families of the young participants that offer the adult perspectives on media representations of their faith, but also they give us insight into the ways that faith has sustained families through moves across the world and often across very war-torn lives. People from different faith groups, quite interestingly, say quite similar things about the way that their faith has sustained them and the ways in which religion offers them emotional and cultural support. So the parent focus groups take place over a shared meal, with time outside the focus group questions providing opportunity for adults to talk to each other in a less structured format. Throughout the focus groups, the families share their experiences of being religious, but often also as building a new life in the local community as a migrant. So not all the participants are migrants, but a large % are. We'll have a look at some of the statistical breakdowns in a minute. Many of the Australian research participants expressed disappointment in some of the perceived misconceptions of Islam in Australian public life. You can read this quote. It's quite moving to hear some of the women's experiences of prejudice of living as a Muslim woman. One Sydney participant noted how Muslim identity plays a central role in negative stories in Australian media, saying, if one Muslim does the wrong thing, they don't say a lady did the wrong thing, they'll say a Muslim lady. So this public perception of the Muslim figure has contributed towards heightened safety concerns for the families in our work. Another female focus group member recounted a time when a middle-aged man who was completely unknown to her mimed shooting her and another scarfed woman from his car as they were walking down the street. So this incident has led to fears about what would happen to her own daughter if she was to wear a headscarf when she got older. The group expressed that they felt this was a pretty normal experience of living as a Muslim person in Australia. So despite such distressing stories, many of the experiences of being religious in a largely secular culture, Christian/secular, that were shared by this group were very positive. One participant described an Australian hospital respecting and accommodating her prayer needs, and others expressed relief at living in a society free from war. Some people that had just moved from Syria were part of our recent work in Sydney, and they were still clearly recovering from life in Syria, as you would imagine. The families also describe ways in which they were educating their children about contributing to a multi-faith and multicultural society. And this is a quote from one of the parents: "The children should respect each other and not state that one religion is ever bad or one is good. This one is bad, and I'm Muslim, I'm the best. Everybody is same. They love each other, they respect each other's religion." So by structuring my empirical work to include the workshops with the children but also the focus groups with the adults, I'm looking to produce complementary data sets, the affective, image-rich, non-verbal making of the children, along with the interactions and the friendships they produced, which we record so we can look at how the art making choreographs social relationships. And then secondly, the contextualising adult responses to the children's art and the adults' experiences of religious life. This interweaving of experiences is really what I'm looking to achieve through the art, an enmeshment of ritual, temporality, geography that's embodied, and then shared beliefs. And this enmeshment is the aesthetic product that I'm looking to create. So my theory of affective pedagogy, of the way that art can change what a body can do, informs my research sensibility. The last 10 years, as we know, have seen a burgeoning of work on affect and increasing entanglement of this work with educational ideas and practices. As noted elsewhere and as noted by Deb in her opening keynote, affect education scholarly entanglements draw on different intellectual traditions, and notably we see a lot of sort of engagement with the respective lineages of Tompkins, Deleuze, Spinoza, and then the newer interdisciplinary field of affect studies. More recently, the field of education has seen thinking through the emotionality of education, which Deb and Jane Kenway have led together, and associated consideration of emotional scapes of education, which is their work there. An exploration of the connections between feminist work on affect and contemporary discussions of emotional scapes of education isn't sort of what I'm doing in this paper, but it broadly informs my choices for theorising the kind of work that I'm doing here. The methods of art making I'm discussing really mobilise feeling, materiality, and what Jane Bennett calls the force of things in school-based and community-based settings. Both implicitly and explicitly, generations of work that have been undertaken by women's bodies, emotions, care and creativity are being built on as sites and spaces of political and pedagogical importance in affect studies, and I think it's really important that we remember this. We remember this before we turn to Sylvan Tompkins or Spinoza. An affect, as we know, is an increase or a decrease in a body's capacity to act that's affected through engagements with other bodies, bodies being units of operation, partial objects that intersect. So a body might be a context, an art-making practice, a child, two parts of a child connecting. The politics of education, then, is also a politics of materiality, of affectivity and emotion, a politics of socio-economic learning and teaching bodies, a politics of school spaces and the emotional lives of students and their teachers. Educationalists need theoretical frameworks that are responsive to these material and emotional truths and must approach such pedagogical considerations as a political project. So, as many of you know, my previous research has shown both the particular value of working with socially engaged practices and illustrated how art communicates affectively through making and displaying compounds that change orientations, that change bodily orientations towards subjects. Affects are things one can't cognitively read, rather they are material connections that one will register as an experience and by which one will be affected, one's orientation will change. So in my first set of methods workshops, bringing this theoretical and practical expertise to bear on the contemporary conditions of young lives, children aged 6 to 10 explored themes of love, friendship, my future and different beliefs. Children were provided with mixed materials such as paints, wools, pencils, crayons and felt, and were asked to create artworks within the themes discussed, as well as self-portraits. They initially worked on their own before collaborating in groups to explore images of shared values or what really matters. For the young ones, we'll talk about what really matters and then link that to the concept of value. And then they come together to work on a large interfaith future. They're encouraged to explore other media types such as video, Instagram and Snapchat. And so the boys are especially keen on Instagramming and Snapchatting things. If they might not want to make a collage, and they'll like to do the social media on a particular artwork. So the week ends with the children working on a large singular artwork. And I'll show you some of these artworks in the slides to come. So that's one of their draft banners. And so the kids are coming up with the words they're choosing here, and service was one of the most popular words, which I think is obviously a strong kind of sentiment in the Muslim faith. That wasn't our final banner, that was us trying to think about what some of the icons and ideas in religions are. So in the second set of methods workshops, the children created three-dimensional paper mache objects, which were a really interesting way of them becoming friends. And they decorated their objects with symbols that expressed aspects of their faith. So they were encouraged to work with people they didn't know from backgrounds and beliefs that differed from theirs. They started building paper mache globes around balloons, which they painted and decorated and covered in lights, LED lights. And the globes represented worlds of shared values and different beliefs. And I think I've got some shared values and different beliefs here, but they might be a bit further along. Look at this. These are all our research sites that I'm going to talk about. So you can see and then you've got to sort of imagine them lit up. They were quite exciting. So the families took the globes home with them at the end of the workshops, and the kids had them in their room. So what really stood out to me is the way that materiality mediated the children's relationships. The boys bonded through pouring paint from one container to another, through flipping bottles, through watching YouTube. The boys especially had a love of viscous substances, so they used huge amounts of paint and glue in becoming friends. The girls painted rainbow stripes on globes and, played their favourite pop songs. Materiality bonded the children who didn't know each other at the start of the week. Within 2 days, they were helping each other cut out their stickers and glue them on, or decorate each other's work. This presented an opportunity for them to learn about the traditions of other faiths and to learn about traditions of their own faith in a little bit more detail. The way that they understand faith is often through ritual and social structure rather than having cognitive stories around why things happen. So I led the workshops and the children's group discussions that are part of the workshops. And we have little breaks where we examine what each aspect of the faith the children want to present is and why they want to present it. The data is captured on a stationary digital camera and microphone on tripod, and that sort of has a choreographic perspective of a room of how young people come together and are organised around different making projects. And we also use digital SLR cameras and smartphones to capture just small photographs. So the children are asked about how they practice their faith at home and at school, as well as what they'd learned about other faiths from other children that they'd met in the workshop. They were asked to discuss these stickers or expressive symbols that they'd created and share what the artworks meant to them. And midway through each day, the workshops will pause for lunch, and the children and the facilitators eat as a group. And this, I think, is the most important part of the day. This is really the artwork of the project, this conversation. The kids pick the music they want to play, and they talk about stories about their home life. And so a lot of the symbols that they come up with seem at first sight to be quite stereotypical, representing Eid or Diwali. But there are other symbols that complicate relationships between religion and belief. So one female vegan Muslim participant drew a basket of eggs as a stop sign with a cross through it, showing her belief that you know, we shouldn't eat animal products, and that was part of her faith system as she articulated it. Other children, especially the younger children, struggle to connect sort of abstract principles of religion to their daily life, but they will talk freely and draw pictures about being kind to people and being clean, which obviously links to the Quran and the teachings of the Quran. So I think that sharing even on a small level of what these, and you can see there's a woman dressed for Diwali in some of their stickers, so this was a great way for the kids to learn about each other's belief systems and the rituals associated, and Eid and Diwali became kind of the sister celebrations. In the weeks following each set of workshops, the parents and children then participate in the focus group. Well, the children usually finish off making a project in a room while the parents talk to us. And I record the discussion through a stationary camera and a microphone again. And again, the video is just to look at the way that the process is choreographing social relationships. And the questions directed to the parents range from quite specific questions around the children's engagement with and enjoyment of the arts workshops to the broader queries about the experience of living as a minority faith in a secular society. And I'll take you back now to some of the questions. I mean, we have like set focus group questions, and then these are like the starter questions that we get the parents talking with. So one parent commented, they do quite a lot of art in school, but it's all mainly Easter or Christmas related art. It's something that has nothing to do with their culture. In this art class, they've got a chance to express their culture and be who they are, and that's something they really like to do. So if aesthetic choices can be considered a core means through which young people communicate, and theories of affect can help us to see the unconscious ways that art impacts our emotions, we can consider that expressing their culture through art is a way in which young people continue to become who they are and to feel secure in their beliefs, as well as to learn to respect different beliefs. Art offers the young people a way to materialise relationships between faith. So I've noted that the project is across 4 sites, and I wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of the sites, London and Sydney, Manchester and Melbourne, even though I'm really going to talk to you mainly about the Sydney and Manchester sites because they're the field work that I'm drawing on. The quotes that I've given you today and the artworks are from Manchester and Melbourne. And the UK context provides a useful point of comparison for the Australian work, as I've suggested, partly because of the work undertaken through Prevent, and also the existing multi-faith communities in Manchester and London. But I'm also drawing on a lot of British sociological work, especially Les Back's work, mapping liminal forms of ethnicity, that gives us a way of negotiating some of the interfaith prejudice and some of the more complex relationships in urban and multicultural contexts. So there are 3 sites in Manchester and 3 sites in London. And in June, I started some work in Levenshulme in Manchester. So a lot of you will know, so these are the places where we've done work so far. And these are the three sites in London and Manchester. So this is Auburn, where we did our work, and so the same sites continue until 2021. It's longitudinal. And Auburn is the highest Muslim population in Australia. It's an incredibly multicultural area. It's gentrifying, like everywhere in Sydney and London especially are gentrifying rapidly. However, it's more diverse than any other place that I've worked. It's an amazing area, filled with amazing food shops and sort of sites of life. So this is Auburn's sort of 30 minutes from the CBD, and the girl with the bindi in the excellent Diwali pictures from Auburn. These are some of the self-portraits that the young people made from the Auburn workshops. And when they were talking about their shared values and different beliefs, these are what the Sydney kids said. So the Levenshulme pilot, we've done one workshop and are about to go back in for a full week of field work. And that's the statistical profile of the community. It's home to 15,000. The ward of Levenshulme has a high number of residents born in the Middle East and Asia when considered in comparison to Manchester overall, and a prevalence of Urdu, Arabic, Punjabi and Bengali languages. So Levenshulme's overseas-born population is slightly higher than the broader Manchester context, which is 28% to 25.3%, but it's much larger than the figure for the whole of England, which is less than 14%. Again, in contrast to Manchester City Council and England as a whole, Levenshulme's Muslim population is more significant. 28.4% of the area's residents identify as Muslim, in contrast to 15.8% in Manchester and 5% in England as a whole. So in the course of our first day-long workshop, 18 participants aged from 4 to 9 years from a range of different religious backgrounds experimented with using different materials and techniques like drawing, painting and collage. And they began with self-portraits, which is a good way of expressing through colour, line and different materials. They can experiment with a self-portrait before we put them together to work in pairs to identify and visualise what really matters, what our shared values might be, what important things in life are. So we think about everyday life, and of course most young people talk about their family, their friends, and things that really matter to them in their daily lives. Then later in the day, small group works move on to large-scale canvases. The older sort of 6 to 10-year-olds made future cities, and the younger 3 to 5-year-olds made future planets. It's quite interesting that there are relationships between all of the London, so we've done a little bit of work in London, and the Sydney, Manchester and London kids are all really worried about homelessness and all really worried about the environment. And that doesn't come from, I'm there trying to ask them questions about faith and values. So that's really stood out to me, and I think we've got some of their work. This is, for those of you that don't know Levenshulme, this is where it is in relation to England and where our future sites in Manchester are. And these are the large group works that came out of our recent work in Levenshulme. These are the future city and the future planet. So coming together as a large group to reflect on the concept of the future, observations range from the future is going to have streets that are rivers and submarines. So you can see here, these are the streets that are rivers and submarines. It's going to have robotic cars, which are here, I think. And machines that make ice cream for all the city where no one is homeless. So this is the city where no one is homeless and has ice cream. Animals that use words. To much more moving sentiments, like stopping wars, no bombing. And I mean, this is just after the Ariana Grande concert bombing. So, and the ongoing concern that no one is homeless. One of my favourite insights was, in the future we are going to understand all differences from other countries and we can show all people that we care. So they're quotes from a 5-year-old. So the future collaborations in the Manchester region are in the nearby Fallowfield and Hume areas, which are pinpointed there. So the work in London is in the southeast boroughs of Lewisham, Greenwich and Tower Hamlets. They're the quotes from the Levenshulme kids. So these again in London are lower socioeconomic areas. And like Australia, there are ongoing popular rhetorics around these places as sort of multicultural and sort of underprivileged areas. 36% of their population was born overseas. 36% of London's population was born overseas. However, in the east, in Tower Hamlets, this percent is significantly higher. It's 43% of residents have originated from the Middle East and from Asia. So that's 43% in comparison to 36% of the whole of London. So the Tower Hamlets area that we're working in has a Muslim population of 34.5%. And that's significant when you consider it alongside the overall Muslim population of London, which is 12.4. So that's 34.5 where we're working against 12.4 overall, and then again in England 5%, as I've suggested. In addition to being racially and ethnically diverse, these London regions have been recognised as possessing significant levels of economic disadvantage. According to the 2015 Indices of Deprivation, the rankings that examine income, education, skills and training, employment and crime, amongst other factors, Tower Hamlets is one of the most deprived areas of the London boroughs. It's ranked 10th nationally on the Deprivation Index. And so in comparison, the borough of Greenwich, which isn't that far away, and it's the setting for some more of our field work, is the 14th most deprived and ranked 78th nationally. So Tower Hamlets is quite an economically deprived area. Looking further afield to Manchester, the Manchester City Council that encompasses Levenshulme, Fallowfield and Hume, the three Manchester areas where the fieldwork is located, has been ranked the 5th most deprived in England out of 326 authorities, local authorities. So the contexts have to negotiate quite complex social dynamics with fairly limited resources. So that's the breakdown for the Isle of Dogs, where we've just finished doing some field work and we're going back in next year. And that's where it is in southeast London. And this is East Greenwich, where we're about to do some work next week. So Prevent clearly placed discussions about Muslim youth in the British public sphere, although Prevent as a discourse is framed in terms of regulation rather than inclusion or recognition, and I think that's really problematic. In the wake of Prevent, the UK context makes increasingly visible the ways that faith, cultural history and race are processes of identification that call forward belonging, empathy and understanding, but can also create fear, resentment and disavowal. Any politics of recognition become configured around the materialities of the everyday. So I think that artwork for cultural cohesion, recognition and respect is really well placed in contexts such as these. That's where the East Greenwich School is in relation to South East London. And that's our final fieldwork site. So my work building interfaith relationships in childhood conceptually differs from and is held up against Prevent through both my materialist understandings of affect and affective pedagogy, but also through the desire to create recognition and respect. Some of you might know other UK work designed to build relationship through art that has been linked to Prevent, but I think that the existing work, which has primarily been in theatre and different kind of drama relationship building, is both conceptually and methodologically very different from what I'm looking to do. So for those of you who aren't from the UK, who don't know about Prevent, it was originally introduced by a Labor government in 2003, and it has been carried on. Its scope was widened by the Conservative government in 2011. So it was initially a 5-year national policy aimed at terrorism prevention. It's got 4 parts to it, and Prevent is just one part of this larger counter-terrorism strategy. The annual cost isn't officially disclosed, however it's thought to be £40 million a year. Underpinning Prevent, Britain has attempted and continues to look towards discourses of social cohesion, but I would argue that Prevent really engenders very divisive strategies that encourage teachers and community figures to report suspicious or basically non-secular, non-Christian behaviour and possibly radical thoughts and beliefs to authorities. So, Prevent requires mandatory reporting of radical thought. And at times, these tasks are counterintuitive to the project of education. So how can a university teacher encourage critical thinking while having to report any radical thought? Is that not our job, to teach young people to think radically? So a lot of the discourses of Prevent sort of mobilise these epidemiological logics of contagion, infection, risk and bodily threat. You're all going to catch radical thinking. And I think this is a very narrow social imaginary, really, that is implicitly taught through Prevent. And this needs to change, because communities in which young people from different cultural backgrounds thrive together can't be founded on xenophobia, which is basically what Prevent teaches us. We need new public pedagogies and cultural pedagogies that are designed to encourage young people to refuse racist attitudes at the heart of such public discourses about religion and multiculturalism. So that's what I'm looking to do. So I'm going to move towards the conclusion of the paper. I think I've got 5 minutes. And I'm going to talk a little bit about interactive faiths and interfaith futures. So interaction is a co-constitution effected through a coming together of different beliefs and things. Interactive faith is a shared understanding of faith forged through being in relation to other belief systems. In showing the materiality of change created by arts workshops, I'm going to examine the work of Karen Berard, who offers us this frame for thinking through the co-constitutive qualities of bodies and beliefs. Berard describes interaction as the mutual constitution of entangled agencies, which come to be by virtue of bodies and things being co-located. When bodies interact, they do so in co-constitutive ways. Bodies impact on one another through being in relation. Individuals and things materialise through interaction. Agency, or ability to interact, emerges from within the relationship between things, not outside of them. So through the co-constitution of agency embedded in the idea of interaction and the practice of interaction, the act of building interfaith relationships through art can be seen as this co-creation of shared faiths, a rematerialising of young bodies and beliefs that are the relationships between different faiths. Berard develops what she calls a diffractive methodology through interaction. Diffraction is an attempt to make and value new differences while recording the interactions, the interferences, the reinforcements of difference that happen through entanglement. For Berard, diffractive readings are respectful, detailed, ethical engagements. And she believes that the entanglement of matter and meaning questions the dualism of nature and culture, and of course the separation of the humanities and the sciences. That's a young Muslim Sydney boy's self-portrait. Through thinking about diffraction as the differences between relationships of different faiths that come together in the act of making interfaith art, we can see the meanings and values of faiths that become expanded through interfaith work. An example given by Berard that is illustrative here is water waves or ripples. She talks about the way that droplets overlap. So 2 drops of water falling side by side into a pond that makes circles of ripples, and they cross. Being in close proximity, ideas or ripples overlap so that some circles of ripple are composed of actually the intersection of both the 2 drops. They come together. And these points of intersection between the different ripples offer a way of understanding the significance of an artwork about faith that is made by the children of different beliefs. So if we think through the very enmeshed, there are some great sand pictures. Oh, I have to go back through all those maps again. But there are great sand pictures of the enmeshment between different buildings and different images where the artworks bring different belief systems together. 2 faiths coming together to make new beliefs about what religion can be is a diffractive practice. Such a coming together or an understanding of difference and a co-constitution of belief is absolutely critical in contemporary times in which religion is used repeatedly to other certain demographics. Intrafaith relationships hold the possibility for building communities of understanding that can bridge what's often constructed as one of the greatest divides in contemporary times. So in conclusion, the artwork that has been discussed here is a creation of, I've got a little concluding slide as well, I might just find that. Oh look, there are some of my good interactive quotes. I need someone to do the slides. They're the boys making friends through materiality. Okay, there's my excellent concluding thoughts quote. The artwork discussed here is the creation of shared understanding of different beliefs and the mediation of friendship across different belief systems through materiality. So I'm looking to choreograph relationships between children and parents from different faith backgrounds in ways that encourage both understanding and empathy, that allow children to materialise themselves in relation to broader faith communities in new ways. Research on interfaith community building is really beginning to gain momentum outside the realms of psychology, international relations and politics. And bringing such work into the field of arts practices research and thinking through diffraction and interaction as the making of relationality highlights the facts that bodies and beliefs are contextually co-constituted, and I think it allows us to hold in relief the kind of divisive work that things like Prevent is doing, things like media reportage is doing, and gives us a way of speaking back to that. While the issues around interfaith community have until now not been addressed through transnational empirical arts research, clinical studies are suggesting that this kind of qualitative work is really what's needed, and I think that you can see the results are speaking for themselves. Approaching interfaith relations through affect is showing new possibilities for interactive community building in which materialist aspects of community are created through shared belief systems. Arts-based practices offer an ideal way of establishing but also reorganising emotional investments. They provide a vehicle through which to build convivial interfaith futures. We look to make new sets of ordering rules relating to young Muslim faces. While the interrelationships between gender, sex, race and culture and the negotiation of binaries and differences have been widely debated in gender studies and feminist theories, ideas of interaction and diffraction are offering new momentum and fresh insights into debates about interfaith subjectivities because they give us a way of understanding how art can create collective subjectivity, faith belief and interrelation. So that's me for today. Thank you very much for listening.